Hello and welcome, I'm Dr Getahun. The Ethiopian Environmental Protection Authority has been around for a while now, but it has evolved through time too. And my guest today, the Director General, Dr Getahun GaredewDir, says despite the challenges, his institution is doing its level best. A very warm welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So, are you a regulatory body?
Sure, we are now a regulatory body. But,
how so?
As you might already know that our institution made a change in institutional arrangement change, from EFCCC, from Environment, Forest and Climate Change Commission to Environmental Protection Authority.
Where you did a part development as well?
Sure. In the past, we've engaged in development activities, and meanwhile, some different departments within will be working on regulation in line to environmental and climate change issues. But now we are mainly meant for regulatory body. That means we will be looking after the compliance, transparency, and regulation of issues related to environment and climate change.
So, as a regulatory body, have you developed standards on X number of issues? Because it dates back to 1995 when you put in place the environmental protection policy.
The issue is that with Ethiopia as a country, we have got a lot of paperwork in the past. The only problem with those paperwork, they've developed in a patchy way, in different scenarios, in different institutional arrangements and different developmental stages of the country. So what we are trying to do now, we are bringing all together, and we are having a Ethiopian National Environmental Law Development and Enforcement Program as EPA. So we don't have to develop all over again everything, but we are making it timely to the actual environmental problems that are happening now.
What are the major environmental problems that are happening now in this country, you think? Because that's when you set to develop those.
Ethiopia is not different from the rest of the world regarding environmental issues. There are three major environmental problems throughout the world. The first is pollution and waste, while the second is the climate change issues related to climate change, and the third is biodiversity loss. So in Ethiopian context, we are all the same with the rest of the world. The level of the engagement, the level of the difficulties, and level of our regulatory power is different, and our experience is different. Otherwise, these all three major problems merely exist in this country. So those problems come due to the so-called development issues bring that problem. Ethiopia is not different from the rest of the world in regarding to the problems, environmental problems. So we have got the pollution.
Not to the degree to which not in terms of contributing to, for example, global emissions, carbon emissions. It's 0.3%.
Sure. The issue is that you don't contribute to the emission, that you don't contribute to the problem, doesn't mean you are not vulnerable to the problem.
Well, yes, we are, yes.
We are among the most vulnerable countries in the world regarding to climate change because of our geographical location, because of our economic standard, due to different reasons we are vulnerable. So we are most affected by climate change.
Wouldn't the standards be then different in terms of addressing those problems?
Then the standards came from international multilateral environmental agreements.
But do not adapt to the situation in Ethiopia?
When you ratify in your own parliament, you adapt it to your context. So once you adopt it in your own context, then that will be the legal instrument that you are following the compliance of its implementation in the nation. So sure, we are a regulatory body in environmental issues, following after the implementation of those multilateral environmental agreements in this land. And we've been doing that as an institution. But now
Are we equally challenged by those three issues you mentioned?
I would say in some of the issues, and the one or two of the issues, we are even more affected by those problems.
Those would be?
Like climate change and biodiversity loss. We've been affected very much. So we have to work hard in our engagements toward this.
Why do you think that is?
Sure. The level of your tolerance against your as a country, the level of the economy for example, when you say you are vulnerable for climate change, that means you will be affected economically, you will be affected in your livelihood style, your livelihood engagements will be affected. So the resilience that you have got, some of the loss and damage due to climate change are becoming irreversible. For example, last year we have got this drought in some part of the country. People lost their mainstays, people lost their cattle. So that loss and damage is not easy to recover within a given period of time.
So are you saying that people who are there to make ends meet have little concern for the environment? Or is it the government who is not putting so much attention into this issue? What is the cause for it? Or it's a combination of many factors?
Look, some of the environmental problems are not going to stay within the nation. I mean, it's as we are part of the world, we are taking the problems from the rest of the world. The so-called the developing nations made the main contribution to climate change. So our engagement to bring the resources to for example, we've pledged to reduce the carbon emission. The same setup of international agreements that made us to obligate us to make the national determined contribution toward this low carbon emission through our development, oblige the other parties, the developed nations. The same agreement also obliges the developed parties to compensate for the loss that's coming to our disaster. So it's towards our duties and responsibilities to bring those pledges to the country.
Well, the pledges aside, haven't we here in this country contributed to this loss that you just mentioned in many of its forms? Look at the biodiversity. Look partly at the drought. I mean, also there is something that's beyond our control. There is something that we have contributed to the making of basically this drought as well. Look at the deforestation, the speed with which we are attacking our forests, and so on and so forth. Haven't we contributed to this problem, you think?
Sure, there is no deny on it that some of the problems, starts and begins here home. Regarding, for example, the pollution issues, immediately affects the immediate surrounding. So you can see the effects, making adverse effects on the human life and the environment immediately. But when it comes to the issue of climate change, it's different. You have to talk about the global issue. That's why I'm bringing it. Yes. But climate issue have got different components. Like once it's happening, the world is struggling to control it within like a given limit, like 1.5 degree Celsius rise within from the industrial period time. In that regard, our contribution is very few, as you've already mentioned. But the issue is, in our perspective, we have to work hard on the adaptation part. And the mitigation is, we are struggling with the rest of the world. We've pledged very generously to reduce like 65% of our emission on baseline scenario, like as business as usual scenario. From that, we've pledged to reduce 65% of the carbon. That we've done a lot. But the problem is like...
is that achievable?
if the rest of the world still is going to help us, work with us toward this achievement, that pledge doesn't come from out of the blue. We've reached to that number. We've worked. Like, for example, if you see Ethiopia's NDC, that is a nationally determined contribution to reduce 65% of its carbon emission from the business as usual scenario, it's like we expect the world, the parties of the Paris Agreement to contribute towards that. It's not only our obligation to do that. Like, for example, when it comes to the finance, only 20% of the finance to do that development path is expected from Ethiopia. The rest of the 80% is... Yes. So the Ethiopian government is making a lot of efforts to cover its part, even more than ever.
So what is your role in that? What is your contribution to this pledge as an Environmental Protection Authority, as a regulatory body?
As a regulatory...
Which basically has the environmental protection, the environmental policy of Ethiopia put in place way back in the 1990s, mid-1990s, as I've said earlier.
Sure. Regarding of the policy issue, because we are raising that environmental policy now and then, since it is ratification 97, we've made some other legal documents regarding Ethiopia's environmental issues and Ethiopia's climate change issues.
But that document basically stays the same.
Yes.
It's still there.
Yes, but some other documents that helps to regulate those issues. For example, they should have already mentioned, like, for example, the Ethiopia pledged to reduce its business as usual emission scenario by 65%, and then what are we doing is based on our NEDC document. That's our National Determined Contribution document. So what we do against that document is that we follow after all the development institutions, like all ministries, for their efforts to reduce their carbon emission, whether it was transport, energy, agriculture. So we had this gauging system to follow after and report it back to UNFCCC, that's the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, biannually. So we made that measurement, reporting, and verification is expected from us. So we are following after the transparency of the work.
Is it transparent enough?
Yes.
How is that regulated? How is that reviewed?
There's MRV, or Measurement, Reporting and Verification departments, are installed in every ministries that do pledged to reduce their carbon emission, and we take the reports. We look after their reports and then verify that if it's exactly with the same amount or, above that. So there are working relationship between us. They regularly report. We regularly follow after them. So, sure, Ethiopia is doing its best. So
the synergy is there. Is that what you're saying? Like the institutions that you've just mentioned?
Sure. We plan together, work together. For example, when we say we will reduce 65%, from that 65% emission reduction, for example, like the most is expected to come from forest sector. So that's why the government is working hard on forest sector. One of the best way to show the actual engagement of governments is working towards their place.
Is it working? That's what my issue is. The other day I had on the show, I guess talking specifically on this topic, the post-planting scenario, what it looks like, because that's a very important phase as far as the reforestation program or the planting of trees.
Once you plant, it cannot be immediately be a forest and be sequestering carbon soon. But the issue is that, are we in the right direction of the trajectory? It should be the question. From my perspective as EPA, these seedlings that we've planted for example, in our Green Legacy, the Prime Minister's initiative, there will be a forest within the coming 3-4 years. They will be fulfilling the definition of forests, and then carbon sequestration calculation will come soon. So, and forest development, and as an institute, the government is taking the initiative to have an institute, a working institute that's mainly meant for forest development. That was a great initiative.
You actually just came back from a field trip,
yes,
as part of the Green Legacy.
Yeah, I was in Afar region for the part of this Green Legacy initiative. We've been planting trees in Afar.
So why were you there? Do you go everywhere in this country as regards to planting of trees, or is it selected areas that you make a trip to visit?
No, we as all the government departments in different areas, assigned to plant trees, do some summer initiative that comes every other summer. So voluntary activities being made by all line ministries. So as part of it, we've been in the region itself is doing great. That like 10,000 trees that we've been planting, moving from Addis might not change immediately a big difference. That doesn't bring a big difference, but it shows the commitment and the engagement that toward this positive change. So I think the issue is like when we raise up the issue of forest sector development, is like that was the sector 80% of Ethiopia's pledge is going to come from. That's why the Ethiopian government is working hard towards achieving that.
So when there is we see that huge drive for industrialization in the country. You have several development projects, both private and public or government owned. You have huge tracts of land that need to be preserved, conserved, and so on. Do you think you have a major role to play in terms of protecting the environment before any of such projects that I just mentioned are initiated and put in place?
Sure. Regarding development projects, the problem in the past that we, as the Ethiopian government, have been the major development agent in the country. The institution that we've been working toward this environmental protection itself is engaged in some kind of development aspects. So there have been some waivers to comply with environmental standards for government projects. But now the thing is different. We are standalone institute just to follow after the issues of environment. That means, for example, the environment and social impact assessment departments in different ministries were rebuked towards EPA. So it's the duties and the mandate of EPA to approve the environment and social impact assessment documents. That means no project can be implemented in Ethiopia before getting approval of environmental and social impact assessment.
Which is your agency?
Yes.
So you're saying that you're not toothless. You have the right instruments to enforce those regulations.
Yes. The other issue is like the first is...
But we have industrial wastes still being reported. Rivers are being polluted and so on, right?
No denial. The rivers, as long as we are striving towards development, that as the least developing countries, we need these industries. We are not working toward this environmental veto power. We are working toward this environmental sustainability. That's why we are looking after big documents and give them some issues to amend before implementing their projects. Regarding the pollution issues, we're working with Ethiopian standard agencies, Ethiopian Institute of Ethiopian Standards, for example, this year we've ratified through the National Standard Council 4 obligatory standards. One is industry sludge. The other is effluent from some horticulture farms. So the other is electronic waste. So these obligatory standards, now we have got the document available to look after those pollution issues.
So that they can comply.
Yes. The first thing that we have to do is now to give them the trainings to avail the document for them. The first thing that we have to look for when we go for regulation is their self-assessment document. So an institution, and every institution needs to have a self-assessment document in its hand to make avail for regulatory body. But the problem in the past was like having standards that are quite similar with the rest of the world, timely and very clear standards. So we are making it now available.
When do you think you would be able to enforce those?
We've already started. Like, for example, I can mention you, like this year we've banned like 18 service-giving sectors and 8 producers in Amara, and like more than 40 service-giving institutions in Romia. They've got they've banned to stop those activities that have been polluting the environment. Now we have got the right to even to close institutions due to their evil acts on the environment.
I mean, you can talk simple things that I think is very simple. Sound pollution. It's the worst in this. Probably Addis is one of the worst in the continent. You can't even do anything about it.
Regarding sound pollution, still I would say no denial. But the issue is that we have got the standards. We have to teach the community and also the look, regarding sound pollution is something that add up on some previous experiences. We look, in Ethiopian context, like religious institutions use very huge amplifiers.
Stores, bars, you name it.
Yeah, so bars are inside.
No zoning, basically. The city, I don't think Addis Ababa has any standard zoning. I mean, there is no zoning.
Sure, that's what I've been mentioning. Like, we've been building up on what we have already in the past. So that's why bars are inside our living areas, and they are using sound pollution issues. So what we prefer to do regarding those pollution issues, like specific to sound pollution, we have to teach and make a public awareness that
before you try to...
Yes, the Addis EPA, the regional one, the city administration's EPA, they're doing a lot on these days because there are complaints from public that they have to respond within a given period, within a week time. So they've been fighting to reduce that, but it's not an easy job. People think that it's right to open a music in his own territory, but that's not. So you have to let him know that he's doing something legally banned. Even they don't know the maximum limit of the sound that they can use, the timing, and those issues are problems. So that's why we prefer to work on public awareness before going to the fine and the other issues.
I mean, EPA has been, the Ethiopian Environmental Protection Agency or Authority has been there since 1995, as you just said, but it has got through many institutional reforms, if you will, or joining hands with other organizations. In 2013, it was the Ministry of Environment and Forest. In 2015, it became the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. And in 2018, the Environment and Forest and Climate Change Commission. And as we speak now, back to when it started in 1995, EPA. What does it say of your institution?
The issue is, as I've already mentioned, institutional arrangements are tactical to implement what I prefer to look at is are those mandates that help the country protect its natural and environmental issues. Are there in place with some agencies are implementing it or not should be the question.
But it has been rocky for your institution, right? There is no stability of any sort, particularly after 2013, right?
Yes, it's been it's been environmental, forest and forest ministry, and then environmental and forest climate change ministry. The issue that, for example, when it comes to the current institutional arrangement, for poor countries, for least developed countries, the issue of climate change should be not a matter of a single institute. So you have to integrate, you have to mainstream those issues in all aspects of the development. That's why we are in line to, assigned to be mandated toward this Ministry of Planning and Development, because Ministry of Planning and Development is the institute that looks after the development plans of all the ministries. And then we are at the back to support the compliance, the standard and the regulation, and the development aspect should be inculcated in every department. So that was that's why the last engagement, the institutional arrangements made regarding the forestry issue. For the change is Environment, Forest and Climate Change Commission is mainly divided into two parts, and forest development is a different institute to work toward this forest development, and then we are here toward this environment and climate change regulation aspect. The development aspect is now given as for all line departments.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Getahun. It was really a pleasure having you on my show.
Thank you for having me.